The first time I walked into a root cellar in Holmes County, Ohio, in the middle of July, I expected damp stone and stale air. What I found instead broke something in me I didn't know was set. The air was cool and dry. It smelled like fresh apples and turned earth. A single bare bulb hung from the joist. The thermometer on the wall read 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside it was 91 degrees. I stood there for almost 15 minutes looking for a unit, a compressor, a fan, a line running back to the house. It wasn't there. And that's when I understood I'd been wrong about everything I'd ever been taught about cooling a home. I'd been wrong about what comfort cost. I'd been wrong about who knew better. And I'd been wrong about the part the soil was already doing for free. I've been going back to Holmes County every summer for the last 4 years, and every time I find something the building industry forgot on purpose. Last August, I sat across a kitchen table from a man named Eli Troyer, while the temperature outside pushed past 96 degrees. He didn't turn on a fan. He pulled a wooden hatch in the floor. His living room dropped to 55 degrees in under 9 minutes. 0 fans, 0 machinery. Just a 41-foot pipe buried 4 feet under the yard. He handed me a glass of cold water and smiled. Said he'd never owned an air conditioner in his life. Here's the promise of this video. For between $227 and $328 in materials, you can build a system that keeps your home between 54 and 56 degrees Fahrenheit all summer long. It uses no compressor. It burns no fuel. It runs on the same physics Persian engineers used to cool desert palaces more than 2,400 years ago. And yes, this works even if your house was built 50 years ago, even if you live in a city, even if your lot is only 30 feet wide. Stay with me. Because what I found in Holmes County uses the same physics the Persians used to cool standing air in the city of Yazd in 600 BCE. And the same physics a root cellar builder in the Palatinate used in 1720. Here's the science, and it isn't complicated. 4 feet below the surface of your yard, the ground holds a temperature between 54 and 56 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. Not because of magic, because the earth itself is a giant thermal battery. Soil that deep sits above the frost line and below the surface heating zone. It barely moves. In winter, it stays warmer than the air. In summer, it stays cooler than the air. In a 2013 study published by Oak Ridge National Laboratory, researchers measured deep Earth temperatures across the continental United States and confirmed an average of 50.7 degrees Fahrenheit at depths between 4 and 12 feet. Your air conditioner doesn't know that. Your HVAC contractor didn't tell you that. But the ground under your feet is colder than your house on every hot day between April and October. A buried pipe works like this. Warm indoor air enters one end of the pipe. It travels slowly through 40 linear feet of Schedule 40 PVC at a depth of 4 feet. The surrounding soil absorbs the heat through conduction, exactly like a car's radiator sheds heat into passing air. The air exits the other end between 54 and 56 degrees Fahrenheit. On a 95-degree day in Phoenix, in a basement in Boston, in a duplex in Dallas, that exit temperature barely moves. The United States Department of Energy has formally documented that passive earth tube systems deliver a coefficient of performance of roughly 4 to 5 units of cooling for every 1 unit of input effort, versus 2.2 to 2.8 for a conventional central air system. That gap represents more than $12 billion a year in equipment sales, service contracts, and replacement compressors. And that is why you have never heard of this. That knowledge never disappeared. It was set aside. It was waiting. Let me tell you about Holmes County, Ohio. It is the largest Amish settlement in North America. I drove there last July with a contractor friend from Tennessee who'd never seen an Amish cooling system. We parked at a farm outside Berlin. The house was a single-story white pine frame built in 1908. There was no AC unit on the roof, no condenser beside the house, no ductwork visible anywhere. The property owner was a man named Jonas Lapp. He walked us around back to a stub of corrugated black pipe emerging from a manicured lawn. He said the pipe ran 41 feet into the yard and emptied into a stone-walled root cellar. The cellar temperature held at 54 degrees Fahrenheit. He sliced an apple for us from a basket on the shelf. The apple was cold enough to make my fingers sting. I asked him who built the system. He told me his grandfather built it in 1962. His father extended it in 1981. He walked the pipe in 2003. 4 generations. The technique came from the Palatinate region of what is now Germany and was rebuilt in eastern Pennsylvania in the 1720s before migrating to Holmes County in the early 1800s. A Pennsylvania State University agricultural extension report from 1942, preserved in the Lancaster Plain Context Study at the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, formally documented these underground air cooling systems as standard practice among Anabaptist farmers. Not experimental, standard. Family knowledge passed mouth to mouth across 180 years. And Holmes County isn't alone. Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, East Hempfield Township, Mount Hope, Ohio. The same technique, the same temperature, the same physics, working quietly every summer, beneath lawns the neighbors mow on Saturday. The deep history is older than anyone selling you a compressor wants you to understand. In what is now Iran, in the city of Yazd, Persian engineers carved qanats, underground aqueducts, and placed air shafts beside them to catch any breeze at the surface. They topped those shafts with structures called badgirs, wind catchers roughly 40 to 60 feet tall, and channeled that pre-cooled air through clay ductwork into the rooms below. A formal measurement of the Dowlatabad Garden wind catcher in 2009 produced air at 59 degrees Fahrenheit on a day the surface temperature reached 113 degrees Fahrenheit. 2,400 years before Carrier filed his first patent. They were cooling palaces with buried pipes while Rome was still laying stone for roads. In Rome, between the 1st century BCE and the 3rd century CE, builders of the Hippocaust system ran hot air through hollow spaces beneath raised stone floors. The floor above the Hippocaust at the Roman Baths of Bath held a measured temperature near 95 degrees Fahrenheit when the furnace below was running. They didn't need a thermostat. The stone was the thermostat. The Koreans call their version ondol, and they have been using a continuous underfloor heating channel fed by smoke from the kitchen fire for at least 2,000 years. The target household temperature is 20 degrees Celsius warmer than the outside air. The fuel they burn is the same fuel any cook would already use. That is 3 civilizations, 3 continents. The same answer. Every civilization that mastered heat or cold arrived at the same answer independently. The Amish never forgot. They carried it from the Palatinate to Pennsylvania in 1720 and kept building it because it worked and because they never needed anyone's permission to build what made sense. Now I want to tell you about how this knowledge was erased, not because it failed, because it wasn't profitable. In 1902, Willis Carrier completed his first modern dehumidification installation at a Brooklyn printing plant. Within 10 years, the Carrier Engineering Corporation and its chief competitors, Frigidaire, General Electric, and Westinghouse, had built an industry worth roughly $400 million a year in equipment alone. By the late 1920s, the industry employed trade associations, certified installers, and code-writing committees in every state. In 1929, the American Society of Heating and Ventilating Engineers published a revised standards guide that quietly reclassified passive ground-coupled cooling as obsolete vernacular construction. That document was signed off by the Standards Committee chair, a man named A.C. Willard. It was never opened for public debate. The mechanism was quiet. It worked like this. Trade associations wrote the new building codes. Building codes became required reading at the architecture schools. Textbooks trained the new generation of architects. Architects specified central air in every new plan. Contractors installed central air because that's what the plan said. Homeowners paid for central air because that's what the builder offered. The refrigeration industry financed research at the major engineering universities. They sat on the standards committees. They testified before state legislatures. They wrote the language you read in your permit office right now. Three allies made this stick. Popular Mechanics and Popular Science ran thousands of pages of sponsored editorial between 1928 and 1955, describing the new miracle of mechanical cooling in glowing terms. The federal government, through the National Bureau of Standards in 1934, adopted mechanically cooled minimum ventilation standards for new residential construction. The equipment manufacturers, Carrier, Frigidaire, York, supplied the engineering data the Bureau used to write those standards, free of charge. The financial connection was simple. A passive earth tube costs $300 and lasts 80 years. A Carrier unit costs $4,000 to install, runs at $60 a month, and lasts 12 to 15 years before it ends up in a landfill. Every quiet farmhouse is a Carrier unit that never gets sold. An entire field of knowledge disappeared from American architecture schools between 1935 and 1955. Not because it failed, because it wasn't profitable. The suppression didn't end in 1955. In 2018, a working group of the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers, the successor to that same body, formally declined to add passive earth tube climate systems to the residential ventilation calculations in Standard 62.2. Internal committee records show the proposal drew opposition from consultants working for the same equipment firms that wrote the original 1929 guide. The financial motive was obvious to anyone willing to look. They don't even bother hiding it anymore. They just call it a safety question. The American residential cooling equipment market is worth more than $22 billion a year. Every passive earth tube installed is a $5,000 condenser that never gets sold. Every buried pipe is a refrigerant line that never gets filled. Every quiet farmhouse is a service call that never gets routed. Now, if you already own a house and you're thinking this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. You don't need to tear up your foundation, rip out your existing system, or buy equipment. You need one weekend, a rented trencher, and one roll of pipe. Here's the blueprint, exactly as I've watched families build it. Pick the north or east side of your home, where the soil stays coolest through the day. Dig a trench 4 feet deep and 40 feet long, sloping downward at 1% from the house toward the far end. At the house end, mount a 6-inch inline duct fan rated at 80 to 120 cubic feet per minute with a draw of roughly 35 watts. Plumb 40 linear feet of 6-inch Schedule 40 PVC into the trench. Wrap the pipe in 1.5-inch closed-cell elastomeric insulation before burial to prevent condensation drip. Set the pipe inlet at 18 inches above grade inside a screened gooseneck vent and mount a filtered louvered register at the room side output. Backfill with native soil and compact it in 6-inch lifts. Through rocky ground, sleeve the run in 4-inch HDPE corrugated drain pipe for stability. The materials run as follows: 6-inch Schedule 40 PVC, $48 to $72 for the 40-foot run. 1.5-inch closed-cell elastomeric insulation tube, $84 to $112. One 6-inch inline duct fan with a thermal rated draw of 35 watts, $42 to $58. One screen mesh aluminum gooseneck vent, $14 to $22. A filtered louvered register, $11 to $18. Fittings, primer, cement, and backfill landscape fabric, $28 to $46. Total materials cost between $227 and $328 depending on your region. The trench takes one Saturday morning with a rented walk-behind trencher. Finish work takes a second half day. A single adult with a strong back can complete the entire job. Closed cell insulation is not optional. Bare pipe causes condensation drip inside the duct and rots the surrounding soil into anaerobic mud within 3 summers. On a 95 degrees Fahrenheit day in late July in Louisville, with the indoor thermostat set to 78 degrees Fahrenheit, this setup delivers a steady stream of 54 to 56 degrees Fahrenheit air directly into the basement or living room at roughly 80 cubic feet per minute. The fan's 35-watt draw costs you about $3.10 per month at the national average residential rate. The buried pipe, installed properly, requires attention once every 7 years. You walk it with a flashlight, you check the joints, you flush it with a garden hose for 30 minutes. That's it. No refrigerants, no service techs, no 4 a.m. emergency calls when the compressor dies in August. Your central air costs $3,400 to $5,800 to install. It costs $40 to $110 a month to run. It lasts 12 to 15 years before it ends up in a landfill. This costs $227 to $328 total. It lasts 60 to 80 years. Your choice. Everything I've covered across this channel, buried root cellars, ancient Persian wind catchers, kitchen smoke floor heating, and ground-coupled ventilation headers, I've put it all in one place. Step by step, season by season, room by room, in the order the families actually use it. It's a single field guide, written to be read with a flashlight in a hand-dug trench. Link is in the description. But stay here. Because what Eli Troyer showed me last August about insulating the inlet vent during winter inversions is the part nobody is talking about yet. If you're the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do. Hit subscribe, not for me. For what comes next. Because this is not a channel. This is a quiet movement of people who have decided they're done being sold what they already own. I want to hear from you. Drop your state and your July electric bill in the comments. I read every single one, and your numbers decide what we cover next. Next week, I'm going to show you what a 1946 Penn State Extension report reveals about heating a home using nothing but the waste heat from a kitchen cook stove. The technique uses no electricity, no fan, and no new pipe, just the existing chimney routed through a built thermal mass floor. And the internal memo from 1949 that proves the Federal Rural Electrification Administration knew the cost of this method was 4.6 times cheaper than the electric blower systems they were subsidizing. You're not going to want to miss that one. Nobody told you, not your builder, not your contractor, not the man who sold you the compressor on your roof. The Amish didn't read this in a textbook. They figured it out the way all real knowledge gets discovered, by paying attention to what the earth was already doing. And they kept paying attention for 180 years. The soil hasn't stopped teaching. We just stopped listening.